Hi, my name's Leora. And last Christmas Eve, my husband pushed me away from the dinner table in front of his entire family and said, "That seat's for my ex-wife. Get out." They laughed. I fell to the floor, holding the napkin I'd folded for him just hours before. But what none of them knew was that night, something inside me broke, and something far colder woke up. The next morning, when he opened his eyes, there were 57 missed calls. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you right now? Because trust me, by the end of this story, you'll never look at family dinners the same way again. The smell of cinnamon candles mixed with roasted turkey hung in the air, warm and heavy, like a promise I wasn't sure would hold. It was 7 on Christmas Eve, and outside, the snow fell in quiet sheets over Pittsburgh. Inside, I moved through the dining room, smoothing the tablecloth one last time, adjusting the silverware so the forks lined perfectly beside the plates. I folded each napkin into a soft leaf shape, the way my mother used to before she passed. I told myself it was my small tradition now, something that still felt like mine. The house looked perfect. Too perfect. The lights from the tree shimmered across the glass ornaments, but the air had that kind of silence that warns you something isn't right. Corin loved Christmas, or at least he loved the performance of it, the laughter, the expensive wine, the image of a happy family. I used to love it too, before I realized I was more of a stage prop than a partner. When the doorbell rang, I heard his voice echo from the hallway, charming, steady, full of that charisma people always fell for. "Come in! It's freezing out there!" His family entered like a storm. Coats flung over chairs, loud greetings, the sound of glasses clinking. Eleanor, his mother, swept in last, wrapped in a red shawl that shimmered like power itself. "Oh, Leora," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've really outdone yourself this year." Her tone meant, "Don't forget who this is really for." I smiled anyway. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor." Corin moved around the room, pouring wine, laughing with his brother, then with Eleanor. Not once did his eyes meet mine. I kept folding the last napkin, his napkin, pressing the edges into the leaf shape, like muscle memory. That small ritual kept me steady, something delicate in a night that felt ready to shatter. "Marla's on her way," Eleanor said suddenly, adjusting her bracelet. She was always so good with people. You remember how she used to run these dinners so effortlessly. The room hummed with agreement. Someone chuckled. "Yes," Corin said. "She just had that touch." The words slid through me like cold water. I didn't look up. My hands trembled slightly, but I smoothed the napkin again until it stayed flat. By the time Marla arrived, the laughter was louder, the wine stronger. She stepped in like she belonged there, because once she had. Tall, elegant, the kind of woman who seemed untouched by time or mistakes. I used to wonder what she had that I didn't. Tonight, I finally knew. She still had them. Corin stood to greet her. "Marla," he said softly, the way people say the name of a ghost they secretly miss. I looked away, pretending to check the oven timer. The turkey was perfect, golden brown. I wished it had burned. Dinner began. The clinking of cutlery, the murmurs of conversation, the way laughter filled every space except mine. I sat beside Corin, smiling politely when spoken to, answering questions about work, about family. The ex-wife's laugh rippled across the table, light and familiar. I could feel Corin lean slightly toward her every time she spoke, like his body still remembered the rhythm of hers. Then it happened. Marla stood to refill her glass, and Corin gestured toward the empty chair beside him, the one I was sitting in. "Marla," he said, "why don't you sit here?" I froze. The room fell quiet. The fork slipped from my hand, hitting the plate with a sharp ring. "I'm already sitting here," I said quietly. He didn't look at me. Not once. "This seat is for my ex-wife," he said. "Get out." It wasn't shouted. That made it worse. His voice was calm, cold, as if he were stating a fact that everyone already knew. The room exhaled in silence. Then, someone laughed softly. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the floor. My napkin, his napkin, slid from my lap to the ground. I looked down at it for a long moment, that leaf shape now crumpled and useless. Eleanor leaned in, her voice low, almost kind. "Don't make a scene, dear. Be mature." Mature. Like humiliation needed dignity to make it prettier. I straightened my dress, smoothed my hands down the sides to steady the shaking. Every eye was on me, waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the anger. But none came. I lifted my chin, looked around the table, at him, at them, at the life I had built out of silence, and said nothing. Then I turned and walked away. My heels clicked across the hardwood, sharp and measured, like punctuation marks in a story that was no longer theirs to write. Upstairs, the bedroom was dim, the mirror reflecting a woman I barely recognized. My lipstick had faded, my hair had come loose, but my eyes looked alive for the first time in years. "Maybe I was never meant to sit at that table," I whispered to the reflection. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered for a second before I began typing. The screen glowed against the darkness, my pulse steady now, calm. Send. Outside, laughter still floated up from downstairs. But something inside me had shifted, quietly, permanently. That night, as the snow kept falling, I started something he could never undo. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed by the window, curled into the old armchair we barely used, the one facing the front yard. The snow kept falling, soft and slow, like it didn't care who had been humiliated that evening. The Christmas lights blinked behind me, casting faint reflections on the glass, but nothing felt warm anymore. Every sound in the house was amplified, the faint hum of the heater, a creak from upstairs, the tick of the clock. They all felt like secrets breathing around me. Not voices, no, but reminders. Echoes of what had been said and what had never needed to be. The image of them at the table wouldn't leave me. Not just Corin's hand, pushing my chair away like I was the help who'd overstayed. Not just Marla's polished smile like she'd won a prize. But the rest of them, the family, watching, saying nothing. It wasn't shock on their faces. It was relief. They'd been waiting for this. They wanted me out of the picture. That was the plan all along. I reached up, slowly pulled off my wedding ring. It felt heavier than ever, like a lie made of gold. I held it in my palm, then set it on the nightstand beside me. "I gave them everything," I whispered to no one, "and they took even the seat from under me." I sat like that for a long time. I wasn't crying. The tears had dried somewhere between the laughter downstairs and Eleanor's smug little whisper. "Don't make a scene, dear. Be mature, mature." Like silence was the badge of being a better woman. But silence was also space. And in that space, I remembered something. A few weeks ago, Marla had shown up, just dropping by. She brought sugar cookies in a tin with a red bow, said she was in the neighborhood, said she missed this house. Corin laughed too loudly at her jokes, laughed like he used to, before we got married. Eleanor smiled at her and said, "It's good for the children to see the family together again." There were no children in the room. I had smiled that day too. I had taken the cookies, but inside I felt something pulling loose, and I ignored it. They weren't just inviting her back. They'd never really let her leave. I leaned forward now, grabbed my phone from the charger. The light from the screen lit up my face, harsh and honest. I scrolled. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were precise. Messages, photos, receipts, all of it. I tapped into the shared business account, my account. I knew the numbers better than my own birthday. I had run our books for 5 years. There it was, an invoice labeled Consulting Boutique Relaunch. Thousands transferred directly to Marla's LLC. Funds routed from our marketing budget, the one tied to my name, my signature. So that was what my seat at the table was worth. I stared at the screen. I almost called him. I almost sent a text. You think I'm stupid? But I didn't. Not yet. Rage burns fast, but revenge needs to breathe. Instead, I started gathering. Forwarded everything to my private email. Created a new folder. I named it Winter. The irony made me smile for the first time all night. I attached screenshots, uploaded PDFs, even found an old photo of Marla and Corin, arms around each other, grinning at a company Christmas party from 3 years ago. She hadn't even worked for the company then, but she'd been there. When I was still standing beside him, wearing that green dress he said made me look too serious. I hit send on the last email, then locked my phone. Merry Christmas, Corin. The house was still now. Not a sound from downstairs. The music had stopped. I imagined them all asleep in their guest rooms, dreaming of a holiday that felt clean and whole. I stood and walked to my desk. I still had one napkin left, the last of the ones I had folded earlier. It was still shaped like a leaf, soft at the edges, a little uneven. I smoothed it gently, laid it down beside my phone. You took my seat, I murmured, but tomorrow I take your foundation. By the time the sky turned pale blue, I was still awake. The house was quiet, too quiet. Not the kind of stillness that brings peace, but the kind that makes every sound echo through your bones. It was the morning after Christmas. Cold, hollow. The kind of morning that felt like something had ended, and something else was just beginning. I wrapped myself in a thick cardigan and walked into the hallway. Corin's side of the bed had never been slept in. His slippers were gone, his phone charger missing. My eyes drifted toward the study. The door was half open. Inside, his desk drawers were pulled out. Empty. The framed picture of our anniversary trip to Napa was gone. His laptop, the old brown leather briefcase he always kept under the desk, the bottle of bourbon he said was for special days, all gone. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up instantly. 57 missed calls. All from Corin. I didn't open a single voicemail. Instead, I scrolled to the banking app. Notifications filled the screen. Joint savings account accessed at 3:12 a.m., another withdrawal at 3:45, and a final transfer flagged as suspicious at 4:02 a.m. I stared at the numbers. Nearly every cent gone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I exhaled, slow, long, and I felt the corners of my mouth lift, just a little. He thought he was the only one who could pull strings. But I'd spent years learning the knots. A week earlier, I'd met with Mr. Dunleavy, a quiet attorney in Squirrel Hill who once handled my father's estate. He still had the same black-rimmed glasses and an office that smelled like cedar and dust. I had told him, in very plain words, that I needed my name protected. My work, my ideas, my brand, and I wanted it done quietly. Corin doesn't need to know, I had said. Mr. Dunleavy had simply nodded, like he'd heard that line too many times before. By the end of that meeting, my designs, my intellectual property, and every license tied to my boutique had been moved into a trust with my name, and only my name, on it. I called the folder Winter, and that folder wasn't just receipts and business documents. It was leverage. It was insulation. It was the one thing I knew Corin wouldn't see coming because he never thought I had it in me. Around 7:15, my phone rang again. I didn't rush to answer. I walked into the kitchen, made a cup of black coffee, and only then did I swipe the green button. "What the hell did you do?" Corin's voice came through like static mixed with fury. I held the mug to my lips, but didn't sip. "I just made sure what's mine can't be stolen again." Silence. It stretched out between us. And in that silence, I could feel it. His panic, his grip slipping, his world shifting in real time. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "No," I replied. I knew exactly what I was doing. He hung up. I looked out the window, watching the wind whip snow off the edges of the porch. I didn't feel victorious. I felt heavy, like carrying your own justice still left bruises on your shoulders. "It's strange," I whispered. "When justice finally comes from your own hands, it feels heavier than you expect." I turned off my phone and returned to the living room. The dining table was still there, untouched. Plates from the night before had been cleared, but the space still held a kind of ghost. I couldn't bring myself to sit just yet. Around 9 o'clock, a knock came at the door. 3 firm taps. Not Corin. I opened it to find 2 men in dark coats. One of them pulled out a badge. "Ma'am, are you Leora Shepherd?" "Yes," I said, steady. "We're following up on reports of suspicious financial activity connected to Shepherd Design Group. We were told you might have insight into the accounts." I stepped aside and motioned them in. We sat in the front room, and I handed them a folder I'd prepared after I got off the call with Corin. I didn't tell them what to look for. I just pointed and said, "Check the signatures. You'll see which ones are mine and which ones were forged." The younger detective looked at the paperwork, then at me. He didn't say much, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes, like maybe he'd seen women like me before, calm on the surface, but already 5 steps ahead in the fire. They left an hour later, told me they might return. I told them they were welcome to. After the door shut, I stood in the hallway alone. No sound, no breath from another room, just me. I walked back into the dining room and pulled out the same chair I'd been pushed away from 2 nights earlier. I sat down slowly, hands on the table. The chair didn't wobble. The floor beneath me felt solid. For the first time in years, the seat felt like mine. I stayed seated long after the silence returned. The house, once filled with polite clinks of silverware and hollow laughter, had grown colder than the wind scraping against the windows. I could hear the rain beginning to fall. Not gentle drops, but sharp, frozen beads tapping like fingers on glass. I stayed in that chair until the sky turned to dusk, and only then did I reach for my phone again. It rang before I could even touch the screen. Blocked number. I didn't hesitate. I answered. "Leora," came the voice. Soft, breathy, yet polished like porcelain. I didn't need her to say her name. She didn't ask where Corin was. She didn't ask what I'd done. She just whispered, "You've started something you can't control." I leaned back slowly, letting her words hang in the air between us. "You always speak in riddles, Eleanor, or is this just your version of a threat?" She sighed like a disappointed schoolteacher. "No, darling. It's a warning." Her voice had that exacting tone I'd heard so many times, half pity, half preach. She continued, calm as ever. "Men make mistakes, Leora, but women like you destroy families." I nearly laughed. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even rage. It was that moment when you realize the script someone's reading from has never changed. Not in years, not in generations. Always the same. Be quiet, smile, forgive, stay. "You always needed a villain, didn't you?" I said. "And you preferred it be a woman who spoke too loudly." "I preferred peace," she replied. "No," I corrected. You preferred obedience. Silence ticked between us. You think Corin was wrong, but you've gone too far. There are ways to fix these things, to repair what's been overstepped. I caught the edge in her words. It wasn't about morality. It was about image. I didn't overstep, I said. I finally stepped out of the corner you all shoved me into. The rain pelted the windows harder. I stood and walked toward the back hallway, where I kept the family files in an old cabinet, the one Corin never bothered to check. Her voice continued, unbothered. You know, dear, she said, gentler now. I've been through worse than this. I once handed over everything to a man I trusted. Thought it was love. Thought I was securing a future. He emptied me out before I even realized it. My father's trust, my name, gone. Her voice cracked. Not out of emotion, but memory. And that's when I saw it. She wasn't afraid I'd ruin Corin. She was afraid I'd become the woman she once should have been. You see yourself in me, I said, barely above a whisper. That landed. I could hear it. She inhaled, sharp and quiet. That's why you hate me for not breaking. You think you're strong now, she snapped. But Corin won't stop. He's desperate. I nodded, as if she could see me. Neither will I. Desperation built me too. The line went dead. Not a click, not a goodbye. Just gone. I stayed in the hallway for a while, hand resting on the cabinet door. My breath came slowly, like each inhale carried years I hadn't realized I was still holding on to. That night, I made chamomile tea. I didn't need it to sleep. I knew sleep wouldn't come. I just needed something warm in my hands. I sat by the window again, watching the dark outside stretch like a sheet over everything. And then, a new message blinked onto my screen. No sender. Just 4 words. Check your father's trust. I frowned, heart pacing, but not panicking. I walked to the study and pulled the hard copy binder from the cabinet. Thick, dated, but organized down to the page. I flipped through it, section by section. The foundation. The trust my father had left for legacy grants. It had always had my name listed under successors and co-trustees. Always. Until now. My name was gone. Replaced. Corin. He had replaced me. Not legally, not without forged papers. But the signature looked like mine. Too close. My hand trembled for the first time in days. This wasn't about our marriage anymore. It wasn't about Christmas or tables or who sat where. It was about legacy, identity, theft at the blood level. I dropped the folder on the desk and stared at it. That night, I opened the digital folder again. Winter. The one I had created for survival. It wasn't just a backup now. It was evidence. It was a map. It was fireproof. I whispered into the quiet. He stole my father's legacy. Now I steal back the truth. By morning, the snow had melted into a slick gray slush, coating the sidewalks like the remnants of something that once looked beautiful. I barely noticed the cold as I walked toward the law office downtown. My heels hit the marble floor of the lobby with a rhythm that felt rehearsed, not by choice, but by resolve. When I walked into the lawyer's office that morning, I remember, Corin was already there, waiting for me. He sat at the end of a long mahogany table, his posture stiff but fraying around the edges. His tie was crooked, his eyes red and swollen. His fingers drummed nervously against a half-empty cup of coffee. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw it. Fear. Real, unscripted fear. "Lyora," he said, voice cracking just enough to betray him. "You came." "I always keep appointments," I replied, setting my bag on the table. Attorney Miller, an older man with white hair and a reputation for fairness, entered quietly and sat across from us. His presence was steady, the kind of calm that makes the truth impossible to hide. Corin started before Miller could speak. "She's taken my money," he said, leaning forward. "She's sabotaged my business. She's trying to destroy my reputation." Miller looked at me evenly. "Mrs. Devane, do you wish to respond?" I didn't say a word. I simply opened my bag, pulled out a thin folder, and slid it across the polished wood toward him. Inside were contracts, bank logs, and time-stamped receipts, all showing the trail of transactions Corin had signed himself. Miller flipped through them slowly, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the heating vent. After several pages, Miller looked up. "Mr. Devane," he said quietly, "these are your signatures." Corin froze. His jaw twitched. His fingers stopped moving. Miller leaned back in his chair. "You authorized these transfers personally." "Every one of them." Corin's lips parted, but no words came. His face turned pale, and I watched the moment his carefully built story collapsed. "You're destroying everything we built," he finally whispered. I met his eyes. "No, Corin. You destroyed it when you decided I didn't belong at your table." For a moment, everything went still. Even Miller stopped taking notes. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but my voice stayed steady. I reached for my planner, opened it casually. A page marked with the same folded napkin-shaped paper I had used as a bookmark. Miller glanced at it, didn't ask. He didn't need to. It was my quiet reminder of who I was before they tried to make me small. Corin shifted in his seat, angry now that his mask had cracked. He pulled something from his briefcase, a printed email. "You think you're so clever?" he said, shoving it across the table. "This proves she took money from the company's emergency fund. She forged my signature to move assets." Miller scanned it, then raised an eyebrow. "Do you have the original copy?" Corin hesitated. It's digital." I smiled, slow and measured. "You forged my name once already, Corin. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you used the wrong font again?" He blinked, confused. "Font?" Miller looked between us. "You're saying this was falsified?" "Yes," I said. "The original was drafted in Helvetica. Corin prefers Times New Roman. This one's Helvetica." Miller chuckled under his breath, more disbelief than humor. "Not the smartest forgery I've seen." Corin's face went red. He tried to speak, but every word stumbled on its way out. I stood, gathering my things. "You don't need to push me out this time," I said softly. "I'm already walking away." He slammed his hand on the table. "You think this is over?" I reached into my bag, pulled out the folded napkin, the same one I had crafted before that Christmas dinner. I placed it on the table beside him. "That's the last thing I ever made for you." He stared at it like it was a weapon. As I turned to leave, he muttered under his breath, "You think you've won?" I paused at the doorway, hand on the frame, but didn't turn back. "Winning isn't the point," I said. "Being free is." The sound of the rain against the windows grew louder, almost like applause. But it wasn't triumph I felt, just release. Outside, the air hit my face sharp and clean. I stood for a moment under the gray sky, breathing it in. Freedom didn't feel light. It felt earned, heavy, but mine. And I knew it wasn't over. Freedom always costs more than you expect. I didn't understand how true that was until I opened my front door that evening and saw the dark sedan parked across the street. Its engine was off, but the driver didn't bother hiding. A man sat inside, holding a coffee cup and watching my house like it owed him answers. My stomach tightened. That quiet car said everything. The war had gone public. By the time I stepped into the kitchen, my phone was already vibrating. First a news alert, then another, then a dozen more. I reached for the screen, thumb trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I already knew was waiting. Businesswoman accused of defrauding husband's company. Charity tied to financial misconduct. Devane family scandal unfolds. They didn't print my full name at first, but they didn't have to. The photos said more than the headlines ever could. Cropped images from old holiday parties, me standing in the background, smiling politely next to Corin, were now twisted into narratives I hadn't agreed to. I sat down on the edge of the couch, my fingers digging into the fabric. Every notification felt like a slap from someone who once hugged me. I opened my email. 3 sponsors had already pulled out from my holiday line. A longtime client left a cold one-line message. "Until you clear this up, we have to part ways." Corin and Eleanor had clearly planned this, drip-feeding their version of the story through private messages, forwarding edited screenshots, leaking documents I knew were forged. I could almost hear Eleanor's voice in every concerned friend, reaching out with faux sympathy. "They wanted silence from me," I muttered. "Now they want a quote." I didn't give them one. Not yet. Instead, I made a cup of tea. I let it sit untouched while I stared at the snow outside, now turning sleet, battering the windows. There was a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with the storm. I broke my own rule and called Tessa. She picked up before the second ring. "I saw it," she said, not even needing to ask why I was calling. "It's all over Twitter, LinkedIn, even a gossip blog that never used to care about anyone over 30. There was a long pause before I found my voice. Was I too quiet for too long? Tessa didn't hesitate. "No. You were building your proof while they were building noise, and now they're loud because they're scared." Her words hit something deep inside me, something raw I hadn't let myself feel in years. After we hung up, I sat on the floor beside the fireplace and opened the winter folder again. There, among the files I had prepared so carefully, were copies of every contract, time-stamped and notarized, logs of every conversation I had backed up, original images, not screenshots, the kind of evidence that didn't just hold in court, it held in public opinion. And yet, it wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about reclaiming the years I let Corin become the face of my work. The man who once told me, "You're the heart, I'm the face." I had believed that, believed it was romantic, believed it was partnership, but it was erasure. One post at a time, he replaced me in the eyes of our clients, our circle, even our friends. I became the shadow of my own design. "I thought silence was dignity," I whispered aloud. But maybe silence is what gave them room to rewrite me. Not anymore. I pulled up my business profile, then my personal account. I uploaded every document, every signature, every timestamp onto a single drive and made the folder public. Captioned it simply, "Truth doesn't need PR, just timing." It didn't take long. The first wave was doubt. People questioning the validity, asking for clarification, then the shift. "She has the receipts." She kept quiet. But she wasn't blind. Another message popped up from a reporter who had emailed me just hours before, asking for a statement. This time, they wanted to retract their article. They asked if I'd be willing to do an exclusive. I declined. I didn't need an exclusive. I needed air. Outside, the sedan had vanished. But inside, I sat again at the same dining chair, the one they pushed me from on Christmas night. Funny how something so ordinary could become symbolic. I leaned back, finally taking a sip of the tea. It was cold, but I didn't care. Sometimes you don't have to find your voice. You just have to stop whispering. And I had. But Corin wasn't done fighting.
And this time, he played dirtier than ever. I barely slept that night, not from fear, but from the thrum of everything unraveling and snapping into place. The documents, the public shift, the message I sent without saying a word. But deep down, I knew Corin wasn't someone who'd let the world decide. He'd always rewrite the story. He just hadn't realized he no longer held the pen. By morning, the snow had calmed to a quiet hush. You wouldn't know a storm had torn through the night before. The streets were still, iced over in silence. But inside my home, tension clung to the air like breath on a window. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when it happened. Glass, shattering. A single sharp sound from the back of the house, followed by boots crunching over broken pieces. I froze, not out of fear, but because I recognized the voice that followed. "You ruined me!" It echoed off the walls like a curse. Corin, you think you can erase me? Just like that? I didn't move right away. I let the words hang there, let the space around them fill with the truth of what he'd done, of who he really was when no one else was watching. His voice grew louder, closer. "You ungrateful, after everything I gave you." That's what always stood out to me. He believed he gave, as if love was a loan and he was here to collect. The front door slammed against the wall. He didn't bother knocking. His hair was soaked from melting sleet, tie twisted, shirt untucked. He looked like the version of himself I'd always imagined he kept buried, unpolished, unmasked. He stepped inside. "Delete the files," he barked, voice hoarse. "Say it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding." I stepped back without a word, slipped my phone from the kitchen counter, camera already rolling. My hands didn't shake. "You should be careful, Corin," I said calmly. "This isn't just noise anymore, it's evidence." That hit him. His eyes flinched, just for a second. Then he laughed, bitter and forced. "You always wanted my name, my success. Admit it." I blinked slowly. "I wanted peace," I replied. "You gave me lessons instead." The room thickened with tension. No more smiles, no false charm. Just two people facing what they let rot between them. "You don't get to make me the villain," he snapped. "You made yourself that," I said. He moved suddenly, grabbing my wrist, his grip tighter than he intended. I didn't cry out, but the clatter from across the yard stopped everything. "I'm calling the police!" A voice rang out, Mrs. Hall. She stood near her porch in her robe and slippers, phone held up like a badge of honor. Her presence, steady and unflinching, sliced through the madness. Corin turned to see her, and the blood drained from his face. He let go of me. "You always needed an audience," I whispered. "Now you've got one." He stumbled back a step. Just then, red and blue lights lit up the frosted glass. The sound of tires on slush, boots on pavement, then knocks on the door, not requests, but protocol. Officers entered quickly, hands ready, eyes alert. "She's manipulating you," Corin shouted, stepping back. "This whole thing, it's a setup." One officer turned to me. "Ma'am?" I didn't speak. I just held up my phone and tapped play. "Delete the files," his voice crackled from the speaker. Silence followed. The officer nodded to his partner. "That's enough." They led him out in cuffs. He didn't yell, didn't struggle. But his eyes stayed on me the whole time. There was no victory in it, just air. The door closed. The officers spoke in calm tones, took my statement, left me with their cards and a warning. "If anything changes, don't wait to call." I nodded. When they were gone, I looked around at the chaos, glass glittering across the floor like ice. A shattered window, a splintered chair, pieces of a life that had come apart long ago but were only now showing on the surface. There was no music playing, no fire crackling in the hearth, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of a snowplow on the next block. I kneeled and picked up a shard of glass, the edge catching the morning light. I wrapped it in a napkin, folded it, turned it into something like a leaf, my final echo. "Sometimes," I said softly, to no one in particular, "freedom is sharp." And as I placed the napkin gently on the table, I knew. Even after he was gone, his shadow lingered. In places I least expected. That was the strange part, how his absence filled the room louder than his shouting ever did. I'd always imagined silence would feel like relief, but instead it sat heavy on my chest. No drama, no arguments, just air, still and sharp like the cold outside. It was early January, Pittsburgh wrapped in white. The holidays had passed, and the city had returned to its slower rhythm. Storefronts stripped their lights, mailboxes were cleared of last-minute deliveries. And my home? It had been repaired, the broken window replaced, the mess swept clean. But somehow I still moved through the house like I was avoiding ghosts. I'd wake up before the sun, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to dream. I drank my coffee in silence. No headlines, no notifications. Just the sound of the radiator clicking and the occasional scrape of a snow shovel down the block. It wasn't Corin that haunted me anymore. It was the space he left behind. The space where noise had lived for too long. One morning, a thick envelope slid through the mail slot. No return address. I knew the handwriting before I even picked it up. Corin's. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first. Let the steam rise around me as if I could soften whatever waited inside. When I finally unfolded the pages, it wasn't what I expected. Signed divorce papers. All of them. Every line completed. And one note? Just 3 words, scribbled at the bottom like a punchline. You win. I sat with it for a while, not out of shock, not out of joy, just stillness. I didn't cry, didn't smile. I simply folded the papers back, slid them into the drawer beside the old napkin, the one I'd used to wrap the shard of glass, the reminder of what had broken and what I had carried through. Winning was never the point. Later that week, Mrs. Hall knocked at my door. Same warm coat, same kind eyes. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a small tin of cookies and said, "Thought you could use a little something sweet that didn't come with bitterness baked in." I invited her in. She sat near the window, hands wrapped around her tea. "You remind me of my younger self," she said after a moment. "I hope not," I replied honestly. "I want to be quieter, but stronger." She gave a soft laugh. "That's exactly what I meant." I hadn't realized until then how much I missed the sound of simple kindness. After she left, I found myself cleaning again, not out of need, just instinct. I cleared out drawers I hadn't touched in years, wiped down surfaces already spotless. There was something about physical order that made internal silence easier to bear. That's when I found it. An old ornament tucked in a box labeled winter. A glass globe, silver and faded. Corin and I had bought it during our first Christmas together. I almost tossed it, but something made me twist it open. I'd forgotten there was a tiny compartment inside, and folded there, yellowed and thin, was a note. Written by me, years ago, in handwriting that didn't shake. "If you ever forget who you are, read this." I unfolded it. "You are not replaceable." I sat down on the edge of the couch, the paper held lightly between my fingers. How many times had I needed to hear those words? And how strange that it was my own voice I'd needed all along. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't scroll. I just sat in the chair by the window, the one I'd been pushed from not long ago. This time, I didn't feel small in it. This time, no one needed to move. I chose where I sat. I reached into the drawer and took out the napkin, the glass shard still wrapped inside. My final echo of everything that had cracked, shattered, cut me. I walked to the river near the edge of the neighborhood. The snow crunched softly under my boots. The city was quiet. Lights glowed behind windows. No one saw me as I stood on the bank and opened the cloth. I held the shard in my palm, cold and sharp. Then I dropped it into the current. Let what cut me become something carried away. As the water swallowed it whole, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. An unknown number lit up the screen. I stared at it, not with dread, but with curiosity. Maybe peace isn't silence. Maybe it's learning which voices deserve to stay. The phone stopped vibrating just as I reached for it. I didn't recognize the number. For a second, I considered letting it go. But something told me this wasn't a telemarketer or another journalist fishing for a fresh quote. When it rang again 5 minutes later, I answered. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. Her voice was softer than I imagined, cautious, almost brittle. Marla, she said after a beat. I didn't say anything right away. The silence between us wasn't angry, it was measured, heavy with what neither of us had said before. She must have felt it too. I'm not calling to cause trouble, she continued. I needed to say something, and I didn't know who else would understand. I leaned back in my chair, the one by the window, the same spot where I had watched my life unravel. Now it was where I let it rebuild, slowly. Marla spoke again. He lied to me, the whole time. Said you were vindictive, said you were trying to ruin him, and I believed it, because he knew how to tell a story that sounded just right. I closed my eyes. Her voice didn't sound like the woman I'd once imagined as my rival. She sounded tired, hurt, familiar. He used my name to open accounts, she said. Ones I didn't even know existed. Now the investigators say we were both listed in the offshore documents. I lost everything, Leora. Not just money. My name, my friends. Even my brother doesn't speak to me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. She wasn't lying. You could hear it in her pauses, the kind of truth that only comes when shame has settled. I thought you were his problem, she whispered. Turns out, you were his mirror. I let that sit for a moment. No, I finally replied. I was his ending. And just like that, the weight I'd been carrying, the rivalry, the assumptions, the anger, began to shift. Not disappear, but shift. Maybe, I said, we were never enemies, just two women caught in the same illusion. On the other end, I could hear her breathe, deep, raw, almost like she hadn't done it freely in months. I wanted you to know, she said, her voice steadier now, that I'm sorry. I judged you from the outside, and I was wrong. Apologies like that don't erase what happened, but they open something, a small possible door. I glanced at my desk. For weeks, a folded napkin had sat beside me, first as a reminder of what had been torn, then as a symbol of survival. But today, in its place, there was something new, a ceramic leaf, handmade, imperfect. I'd picked it up at a local craft fair with Tessa last week. She'd said, "Soft edges, that's what healing looks like." I looked at it now, tracing its uneven ridges with my thumb. Marla, I said, I've been thinking of reopening the foundation Corin dissolved. Not in his name, not in mine alone either. There was silence, then a quiet, disbelieving laugh. You want me to help? I want something good to grow from all this noise, I said, and I think we're the right ones to plant it. It's not forgiveness. It's something better, transformation. Her voice broke again, but this time not from pain, from relief. I'd like that, she said. I'd really like that. We ended the call without fanfare. No promises, no grand gestures, just a quiet understanding between two women who survived the same storm. Later that morning, I opened the window in my office. The air was crisp, but softer than weeks before. Snow was melting, the slow drip from the roof, forming small puddles on the brick path. Winter was easing its grip. I stepped outside, letting the cold brush against my skin. Not harsh, just honest. People say winter kills, but maybe it just shows what survives. I stood there for a while, watching the world turn gentle again, and in the back of my mind, I heard my own voice, not shouting, not pleading, just steady. I used to think revenge was my closure. Turns out it was peace. Yar,